I was 40 years a foreman, and I have buried better men than I'll ever be. But if you sat me down on the bunkhouse step today and asked me the truest thing I ever watched happen on the Two Anvil, I wouldn't tell you about the blizzard of '79 or the night the river took the lower fence. I'd tell you about the morning a widow walked up the ranch road carrying a ledger book like other women carry a Bible, and told Caleb Roan she didn't want a husband, she wanted a partner. And I'd tell you how a man with a stone where his heart used to be said yes to the strangest bargain I ever heard, and how the two of them, playing nothing but honest cards against a man who played crooked ones, saved that ranch and found the one thing neither of them had gone looking for. But I am getting ahead of myself, the way old men do. Caleb Roan was a hard case the year this happened, and he'd earned the right to be. He'd lost his Sarah to the fever 6 winters back, and a piece of him had gone into the ground with her up on the bench under the cottonwoods. After that he ran the Two Anvil the way a man chews on a wound, head down, jaw set, dawn to dark, talking to the horses more than to people. He was a fine cattleman and a worse businessman, and that combination will sink a ranch as sure as drought. He could read the sky and the grass and a steer's health at 50 yards, but he couldn't read a column of figures to save his life, and that year his life just about depended on it. The trouble had a name, and the name was Royce Dorn. Dorn had come up to Quillen's Crossing with money behind him and a smile he wore like a clean collar, and he'd bought up paper all over the bench, notes the ranchers had signed in lean years against the bank that failed. He held Caleb's note now, near $1,100 of it, due in the fall after the drive. On its face it was an ordinary debt, but Dorn wasn't in the business of collecting debts. He was in the business of collecting land, and a note was just the door he used to walk in. He'd already taken the old Pettifer place that spring, called the interest early on some clause nobody'd read close, and Pettifer hadn't the figures to fight it. And just like that, a 40-year homestead belonged to Royce Dorn for pennies on its worth. I watched Pettifer drive out of the country with his whole life in a wagon and his hat in his hands, and I knew, the way you know weather, that Caleb was next on Dorn's list. So that was the table when Addie Cobb walked up the road. A pressed man, a crooked note holder, and a clock running down to the fall. I was mending tack on the porch when she came. She came on foot from town, 4 miles, dust to her knees, in a gray travel dress that had been good once and had been turned and mended since. She was maybe 32, brown-haired, plain-faced in the way that makes you look twice because the second look finds something the first one missed, a steadiness around the eyes, a mouth that didn't waste itself smiling. Under her arm she carried a leather-bound ledger, and she carried it careful, the way you'd carry a thing that mattered. "I'm looking for Mr. Roan," she said to me. "I'm told he owns this outfit and that he's in trouble keeping it." I allowed that both were true, and went and fetched Caleb out of the barn. He came wiping his hands, scowling at the interruption, and the two of them stood there in the yard a moment, sizing each other the way 2 dogs do before they decide whether it's a fight. "You'd be the widow Cobb," Caleb said. "Run the mercantile down in the crossing." "Did," she said. "My husband ran it. I kept its books. He died of his heart in the winter, and in the spring the bank that the store owed took the store because there was a note on it and no man's name to stand the note but a dead one's. They put me out in April." She said it flat, no tremble in it, like she was reading a weather report. "I have lived since on the kindness of the Hendrys, who have 6 of their own to feed and cannot keep me, and they would never say so, which is why I will not stay." "I'm sorry for it," Caleb said, and meant it, but you could hear the but coming. "I didn't walk 4 miles for your sorrow, Mr. Roan." She shifted the ledger under her arm. "I walked out here to make you a proposition, and I'd ask you to hear the whole of it before you say a word, because it will sound strange in the first half and sensible in the second." Caleb looked at me, I looked at the sky. He looked back at her and said, "Say it then." "You owe Royce Dorn near $1,100 due in the fall," she said, and Caleb's jaw tightened, because that was supposed to be his business and nobody else's. "Everyone in the crossing knows it, Mr. Roan. Dorn has seen to that. You'll make your drive and you'll sell your beef and you'll come up short. the way every man on this bench comes up short, because the railroad's buyer pays you $8 less ahead than the market, and you take it because you don't know any better and you've no time to ride to the railhead and argue. And when you come up short, Dorn will find a clause in that note the way he found one in Pettifer's, and he will take the 2 anvil from you for half what it's worth, and you will drive out of this country the way Pettifer did. The yard was very quiet. A man does not like to hear his own ruin laid out plain by a stranger, and Caleb liked it less than most. But he didn't tell her to get off his land, and that told me something. He just said, "Lo, and your proposition." "Marry me," said Addie Cobb. I near swallowed the tack nail I'd been holding. She didn't blush and she didn't drop her eyes. "Hear the whole of it," she said. "I'm not asking for your heart, Mr. Roan, and I am not offering you mine. That's the first half, the strange half. Here's the sensible half. A married man has standing the bank respects. A married woman has a roof and a name and is not a charity case at the Hendry's table. And I can do for this ranch the one thing you cannot do for yourself, which is keep its books, read its papers, find the clause in that note before Dorn does, and get you a fair price for your beef. I have kept ledgers since I was a girl. I read a contract the way you read a steer. I am very good at it, and I have nothing else left in this world to trade, and so I am offering you the best of what I am in exchange for a roof and my name back. A partnership, plainly stated. You keep your half, I keep mine, and we beat that man together, or we don't, but we'll have a far better chance of it as 2 than you have as 1. Caleb Roan stared at her a long moment. Then he said the thing that I think, looking back, decided the whole of it. "And if I say no?" "Then I'll walk back to town," she said, "and you'll lose your ranch in the fall, and I'll be sorry to hear it, but it'll be no concern of mine. I'm not begging, Mr. Roan. I'm proposing a bargain a man's free to refuse." But he was quiet so long I thought he'd refuse it just from pride. Then he said, "You'd have your own room." "I'd insist on it. And it'd be a marriage on paper, a business. On paper, a business, with terms we both write down and both sign." She almost smiled then the first time, just at the corner. "I'd want it in writing, Mr. Roan. I want everything in writing. It's a habit that's kept me alive." And that is how Caleb Roan and Adeline Cobb came to be married on a Tuesday afternoon at the 2 Anvil, by a circuit preacher who plainly did not understand why nobody at the wedding was crying or smiling, with me and the cook for witnesses, and a contract 2 pages long signed and dated and put away in the lockbox right alongside the marriage lines. I never saw a wedding like it. I never will again. I will tell you that I did not think much of it at the time. I thought the man had been bewitched by a clever woman in a hard hour, and I half expected to find the silver missing some morning. I was wrong about her, and I was wrong about him, and I have rarely in my life been so glad to be wrong about anything. She moved into the spare room with 1 trunk and her ledger, and the very first morning she was up before the cook, and by the time Caleb came in from the barn she had the whole of the ranch's papers spread across the kitchen table, every note, every bill, every receipt for 6 years, which Caleb had kept the way a pack rat keeps things, in a flour sack jammed behind the clock. She'd sorted them into stacks. She had a pot of coffee on and a face like a hanging judge. "Mr. Roan," she said, "you have been robbed in daylight for 6 years and thank the men for doing it. Sit down." And he sat. That was the thing of it. Caleb Roan, who took counsel from no living soul, sat down at his own table and let that woman walk him through his ruin column by column. She showed him the railroad buyer's underpayment, $8 a head over 400 head, year on year, more money lost there than the whole of Dorn's note. She showed him the feed bills he was paying double on because he ordered late and small. She showed him last Dorn's note itself, and she read it to him slow, every line, and when she got to the bottom she went still. "There," she said, and put her finger on a line of small print near the seal. "An acceleration clause. If the ranch is materially encumbered or its value diminished before the due date by his judgment, he can call the whole note immediately. That's the clause he used on Pettifer. He'll find a way to say your land's diminished, overgrazed, a fence down, a dry well, anything, and call it early before your drive money comes in. He doesn't mean to wait until fall, Mr. Roan. He means to take it this summer on a technicality, when you've nothing in hand. Caleb's hands closed slow on the table edge. Then we're done, he said. There's no fighting a clause like that. There is, said Addie, if you know it's coming. A clause is a rule, and a rule, Mr. Roan, can be played. And she smiled, and this time it reached her eyes, and I swear I saw something in Caleb Roan's face that hadn't been there in 6 years, the look of a man who'd been carrying a thing alone and had just felt somebody take the other end of it. What followed was the strangest and finest summer I ever spent on that ranch, and I'll tell it as I watched it, from the porch and the saddle and the supper table, which was where a foreman sees everything and is supposed to have seen nothing. She set to work like a flood finding low ground. First she wrote letters, a dozen of them in a clean, strong hand to cattle buyers at the railhead and 2 towns beyond, asking their prices straight out, getting it in writing, the way she got everything in writing. Inside 3 weeks she had a buyer who'd pay full market and send his own men to take delivery at the Pelican Fork crossing. No railroad middleman, no $8 skimmed ahead. On 400 head, that one stack of letters was better than $3,000 more in Caleb's pocket come fall, near 3 times the whole of Dorn's note. I watched Caleb read that buyer's reply twice, and then set it down very careful and look at her across the table like a man looking at weather breaking after a long drought. You did that with letters, he said. I did that with arithmetic, she said. The letters were only how I mailed it. But she knew, and I knew, that arithmetic wouldn't save them if Dorn called the note early on his clause before the fall beef ever moved. The money coming in fall did Caleb no good if Dorn took the ranch in July. So while she set the book straight in the daylight, of an evening she worked on the harder problem, how to play the man's own clause back against him. She rode into Quillen's Crossing twice a week, and she did a thing I didn't understand at first. She made friends with the county recorder, an old gentleman named Albright who kept the land office, and she sat with him over his record books for hours, and she copied things into her ledger, and she asked her quiet questions. She read the public record of every parcel Dorn had taken. She read the Pettifer note that Dorn had filed. And one evening, she came home with her chin set, and laid it out for Caleb at the table while I pretended to fix a stirrup in the doorway, and listened to every word. I know how he does it, she said, and I know how to stop him, but I need you to do exactly as I say, Mr. Roan, and not one thing more, no matter how it galls you, and it will gall you, because the first half of it is to let him think he's winning. I don't like the sound of that, Caleb said. You don't have to like it, you have to do it. She opened her ledger. Dorn's clause lets him call the note if your land's value is diminished. So he'll try to diminish it, or to catch it diminished and swear it's your doing. He'll want a witness and a record, so here's what we do. First, every fence on this ranch goes up tight, and every well runs clean, and every acre looks like the best-kept land in the county. Because I am going to invite him to come see it himself, with the recorder Albright riding along as a neutral witness. And Albright will write down under his own hand, and seal that the 2 anvil is in prime condition on this date. Once that's in the county record, Dorn cannot ever claim your land was diminished before the note came due. The public record will call him a liar. Caleb sat back slow. You want me to invite the man who's robbing me onto my land, and thank him for coming. I want you to take his own weapon out of his hand and file it in the courthouse, said Addie. Yes, and smile while you do it, because a smiling man looks like he's lost, and a man Dorn thinks he's beaten is a man Dorn gets careless around. And a careless man, she said, and there was steel under the quiet now, makes the mistake we need. I will not draw it out longer than it deserves, though we lived every day of it slow. They did it just as she'd laid it. Caleb rode into the crossing and shook Royce Dorn's hand in the street, friendly as you please, and said he'd heard Dorn had an interest in the bench land and would Dorn care to ride out and see the 2 anvil for himself, and bring along old Albright, who'd been wanting to update the survey records anyway. Dorn smiled his clean-collar smile and said he'd be delighted. He thought he was being invited to inspect his future property. He came out the following week, and we'd worked like a chain gang to make the place shine, and he rode the whole of it with Albright at his elbow, and Albright wrote in his official book, witnessed and sealed, that the Two Anvil Ranch stood in excellent condition, fences sound, water good, grass strong on that day's date. Dorn signed it as a witness himself, never seeing the trap, because in his mind a well-kept ranch just meant a richer prize. He rode off pleased. And the door he'd meant to use was nailed shut behind him, and he never heard the hammer. But Addie wasn't finished, and here's where I tell you the part that still makes me grin, old as I am, because beating Dorn's claws only saved the ranch from being stolen early. It didn't pay the note, and a note unpaid in the fall is still a note, and Dorn could still take the Two Anvil honest if Caleb came up short. So Addie played the longer hand. In all her hours in Albright's land office, she'd found a thing nobody else had troubled to look for. Dorn, in his hurry to gobble up the bench, had taken the old Pettifer place that spring and had never properly filed the transfer. The deed sat unrecorded. By the letter of the territorial law, an unrecorded transfer was no transfer at all against a later honest claim. The land, in the eye of the law, still wanted a recorded owner. Dorn held a paper. He did not hold the record. And Addie Cobb, who read a contract the way Caleb read a steer, had seen the gap. She did not exploit it crookedly. That was the thing about her, and I want it understood. She didn't snatch the Pettifer place out from under Dorn. What she did was quieter and harder and a sight more lethal. She found Pettifer himself, wrote 3 counties over till she ran him down, and she learned that Dorn had paid him a fraction of the agreed price and bullied the rest, and that Pettifer had signed under a threat about a sick child and a called note, which is a thing the law calls duress and does not abide. She got it from Pettifer in a sworn, witnessed letter. And then she had Albright quietly check, and the record bore her out. Dorn's whole method up and down the bench had been the same crooked song, threats, an unfiled deed here, an early called clause there, paper that wouldn't survive a hard look in a courtroom. She took the whole of it, the sworn letter, the unrecorded deed, the pattern laid out in her clean hand, column by column, to the territorial circuit judge when he came through on his summer rounds. She did not ask him to ruin Royce Dorn. She asked him only to rule on the law. Was an unrecorded duress sign transfer good or not? And the judge, who did not love landsharks any more than the rest of us, looked at what that widow had assembled and set a hearing, and made it known that any man holding paper on the bench had best be ready to show it was honestly come by. I have never seen a man come apart the way Royce Dorn came apart that month. Every note he held was suddenly a stone around his own neck, because every one of them, dragged into the light, showed the same crooked thumbprint. He could not afford a courtroom. A courtroom would have hung the lot of his dealings out on the line for the whole territory to see and finished him. So he did the only thing a cornered cardsharp can do. He folded. He came out to the Two Anvil one last time, and this time he did not smile. He sat at that kitchen table where Addie had laid out Caleb's ruin 2 months before, and Addie laid out his ruin now, gentle and merciless, all in figures. "You can fight the hearing, Mr. Dorn," she said. "You'll lose, and you'll lose loud, and you'll lose everything you've taken on this bench and likely your liberty besides. Or you can do this." And she slid a paper across the table. She'd had it drawn up already, of course. She had everything drawn up already. "You sell Mr. Roan's note back to him at fair settlement, payable from the fall drive, no acceleration, no clauses, plainly written. You return the Pettifer place to Pettifer for what you truly paid, and not a cent more is asked of you. And you take your money and you go, and the letters in my keeping stay in my keeping, unread by any judge. You walk away whole, Mr. Dorn, which is more mercy than you showed Pettifer, and a better bargain than you've earned. But it's the only one on the table, and like every bargain on this ranch," and she almost smiled, "it's one you're free to refuse." He took it, of course he took it. A gambler knows when the cards are dead. He signed and he rode out of the crossing inside the week, and the bench was shut of him. Now, I've told you the game because it was a fine one and I've dined out on it for 30 years. But the game's not the truest thing, and I told you at the start I'd give you the truest thing. The truest thing was the suppers. Because somewhere across that summer, I couldn't tell you the day, the way you can't tell the day a season turns, the business marriage stopped being only a business. It was small things, the way real things are. It was Caleb starting to wait of an evening till she was at the table before he sat. It was Addie learning without being asked, that he took his coffee bitter and his grief private, and leaving him the room to have both. It was the night the bottle calf was failing, and the two of them sat up with it in the barn till dawn, not saying much, and when it lived they laughed, and I'd not heard Caleb Roan laugh in 6 years, and the sound of it stopped me cold in the bunkhouse doorway. It was the way he started to ask her opinion on things that weren't in any ledger. It was the way she started to look up when his step came on the porch. It was the evening, late in the summer, after Dorn was beaten and the ranch was safe, and there was no business reason left in the world for the two of them to be married at all. That was the evening I saw Caleb Roan, standing by the corral with his hat in his hands like a boy, say something low to her that I couldn't hear, and saw Addie Cobb go very still, and then put her hand on his arm. Just that. Her hand on his arm, and the both of them looking out at the bench going gold in the falling light. They tore up the contract that fall, burned it in the kitchen stove, the 2 pages of it, the terms and the signatures, the marriage of convenience that had saved them both. I know because Caleb told me. Years on, sheepish about it the way a hard man gets about a soft thing. Didn't need it any more, he said. We weren't a bargain by then. We were a marriage. And he looked out the window toward the cottonwoods on the bench, where Sarah lay, and where Addie would lie one day a long time off beside him, and he said the only tender thing I ever heard the man say plain. I'd have lost the place that summer, he said, and never noticed because I'd already lost everything that mattered 6 years before, and a man can't lose what he thinks is already gone. She didn't just save the 2 Anvil Hollies. She made it worth saving again. I married her for the figures. I'd marry her for nothing at all now and call myself the richest man on the bench. He was, too. I watched it the rest of their long lives. 2 of the most stubborn people the Lord ever made, who'd each decided they were done with love and had only a deal left to drive, and who drove the deal so honest and played the long game so square that it turned into the realest thing either of them ever had. She kept her own ledger till the day she died. Kept her own name in the deed, too, right alongside his, she insisted, and he was proud of it. And every fall, when the beef sold at full market and the note long since paid in the ranch sound, Caleb would set the buyer's draft on the kitchen table in front of her and say, "Your arithmetic, Mrs. Roan," and she'd say, "Our ranch, Mr. Roan." And the 2 of them would sit there in the lamplight, the hard man and the sharp-figured widow, partners to the last card. I was 40 years a foreman. I buried better men than I'll ever be. But I never saw a finer thing than 2 people who came to the table asking for nothing but a fair bargain, and walked away with the whole of each other.